What's up everyone, Anup here, and today I'm really excited to be making this video. This is going to be, I guess, more or less the official walkthrough video for the Monarch Kit. Monarch has been out for a couple months now, and I can't thank everyone enough for all of the positive feedback it's received. It really means so much to me because, you know, a lot of time and effort went into making this drum library, and to see the response has just, I don't know, been really motivating to want to keep working on projects and release more drum libraries. So the Monarch Kit is based on my actual setup. I engineered and sampled everything actually right on the other side of this camera in my home studio. This is where I've been doing drum videos and session work for years now, and it's pretty surreal to have my setup just in a Kontakt library. Monarch is available for both Kontakt and Kontakt Player 6 and above, and it is a pretty large library, I'm not gonna lie to you. I did go a little bit overboard with sampling for it. It does come in hot around 42 gigabytes, which is very large for a drum library. However, a lot of what makes that size is there are a lot of options for each position on the kit. Most of the cymbal options, you're gonna have 2, sometimes even 3 options available. For snares, I did 10 snares. If you're asking why, Anup, did you do 10 snares? Well, 11 was just too many. All of that combined with the fact that I did want to make this kit very dynamic. So there's a bunch of velocities for each element. It's a very dynamic kit. My own playing style is also very dynamic. I do play a lot of metal, but I listen to a whole bunch of different styles of music, and I honestly enjoyed playing a lot of styles of drumming outside of metal. So I wanted this drum library to just really have that dynamic range and capability, and that is kind of what contributes to the size of this. I definitely don't ever want to create another drum library this large. This was a pretty big undertaking for sure. Just hours and hours and hours of testing and running it through its paces. Moving forward, you know, our libraries definitely won't reach this size, but it's really cool to have this one gigantic, comprehensive drum library, a whole bunch of snare options, bunch of cymbal options. Let's get into it. So you can see here, this basically just is my setup. It has the 2 rack toms, the 2 floor toms on the right. We have the floor tom on the left, and then a whole bunch of different cymbals. So let's talk about the snare drums. So again, 10 snare drums. My favorite snare on this list is actually at the bottom here. It's going to be this Star Reserve Brass. All-time favorite snares that I've only used in like a handful of videos and for a few session work things I've had in the past year and a half. But one of my favorite snares. The only reason why I'm not using it that often is just I'm kind of afraid of just breaking it. We can go ahead and check it out really quickly. And then we have, you know, we have a Gretsch steel, we have a Ludwig, we have a Star Classic Birch Babinga, which is a really cool wood option. I wanted to have at least one wood option in the list. All the other snares are metal, but wood just kind of has this darker, kind of almost like thuddier feel to it. So really good if you're trying to go for like a more rock sound with Monarch. You can also check out the Ludwig High. So if you're going for more of that kind of like, I guess, knocked loose sound, it's not quite as pingy, but we do have a mix preset that utilizes these higher snares. Definitely brings out that knocked loose vibe for sure, which I'll go over in just a minute. Let's check out the Star Classic Birch Babinga. So when sampling these snares, I definitely left them pretty wide open. I'm not really a fan of dampening the snare too much these days. For Monarch, I left all these snares wide open. So you'll notice there's a lot of sustain and ring in all the snare options. I actually sampled a lot of the snares with 1-ply heads. There's a lot of top end in all the snare samples. Only a couple snares did I use an Evans Heavyweight, which is a thicker 2-ply head. Toms, we only have one option for each, but for the rack toms, I'm using hyperdrive sizes for the Walnut Birch Kit, which is really cool. Just easier to tune, and I personally think they kind of sound a little bit punchier. We have a 16x14 on the right, and then an 18x16. These floor toms, they're really close in pitch, but I kind of did that on purpose just because that's how I do like to tune my floor toms on the right side. I play a lot of patterns and fills that incorporate the kick and the floor toms on the right, kind of almost going back and forth with one another. So I do like really deep sounding floor toms that work well with the kick drum. And then on the left side, we have a 14x12. All right, so for kick drum, we have 3 options. And you can see actually the 22x16 Star Classic Birch Babinga is what loads by default. When I was sampling this kit, it's kind of like a Frankenstein thing. I absolutely love the Birch Babinga wood combination, which is kind of why I wanted to load the 22x16 Birch Babinga kick with the walnut birch shells. However, we do have the 22x16 Star Classic walnut birch kick drum, and we also have a 20x16 Star Maple. This is actually one of Alex's kicks. This is a really cool kick drum because it has a ton of bottom end for being a 20-inch kick. If you want something that's going to work really well for more extreme metal, anything with fast kick drums or anything like that, the 20x16 is going to be a really awesome option. All right, so for cymbals, we have a bunch of Meinl cymbals. If we click on the drop-down menus, Byzance traditional cymbals, pure alloys, pure alloy customs, and then we have a Classics custom dual over here on the right side. The mini bell is actually not part of my regular setup. I wanted to be able to write just ridiculous drum parts where you can have fast double kicks and maybe 2 bells on either side or something like that. This is kind of like a little added bonus, I guess, if you're trying to write more extreme drum parts or just want a different sounding bell. For rides, I did 2 really aggressive ride cymbals, the MB20 heavy bell ride and the 22-inch mega bell ride. Neither of these rides I actually use on my setup. For Monarch, I really wanted to make sure that it was going to have a solid bell sample. Between the 2 rides and this little mini bell, you have 3 really strong bell options. On the left side here, I sampled this Classics custom trash crash. It kind of resembles a China, but it just has a little bit more of that breathiness to it because it is a crash. Really fun cymbal for quick accents. If you're trying to play to a guitar riff or something and you want to just accent certain things on the guitar riff, this is going to be a really fun cymbal to do that with. It's not really a cymbal I would actually crash so much on during a full groove, but really fun for accents. To kind of balance that, we have a pure alloy custom over here. For Chinas, we have 18-inch Byzance traditional, 18-inch Classics custom extreme. The stack is actually really cool. This is kind of like my custom stack, I guess, not really. It's just something I've put together over the years. It's an MB10 16-inch crash over top of an 18-inch traditional Byzance China. And unfortunately, they don't make the MB10 crashes anymore. More unfortunately, I have since cracked that MB10 cymbal, so this stack no longer exists. It's really nice that I was able to sample it and have it in Monarch. That's just the combination of stack I've been using for several years now. One of my favorite stack combinations, and yeah, it's cool that it's in Monarch. We have a little crasher hats here. This is going to be kind of like a mini stack. You can get some really cool effects between here and the splash cymbal. Splash, we have Classics custom dual and pure alloy custom, both really awesome options. Then hi-hats, we have 14-inch Byzance hats, traditional, and then we have 15-inch pure alloy hats. And then over here on the left and right crashes, we have 2 options for the left crash, a Byzance traditional and a pure alloy. And then on the right crash, we have 3 options, Classics custom dual, pure alloy medium crash, and then we have a 20-inch Byzance crash, traditional. The Classics custom dual and the pure alloy are going to be your standard kind of rock metal type crashes, but 20-inch is going to be a really good option if you're looking for just something a little bit more wide open and washy and just big sounding. So as you probably noticed while I was going through the drop-down menus, we do have an unload feature. You can unload the samples for that specific position. And then we have the little speaker icon here for previewing each option in that position. And then as you also saw, if we click on the image, you hear a quick little sample of what's loaded in that position. All right, so let's talk about the main mixer. There is a lot happening on this page. This more or less is kind of like the heart of the instrument to me, just because there's so many things you can do here that relate to workflow, that relate to the sound of the kit. Yeah, so let's get into it. First things first, mix presets. If you're familiar with the Fairview kit, you used to be able to come down here and click on this little button and it's going to show you a list of mix presets that are available in Fairview. However, with Monarch, there's 15 mix presets and that's just way too many to put into a drop-down menu down here. So instead, we actually put them in the snapshots. So you can come up here to snapshots. If you don't see snapshots, probably because you have the info view selected, all you have to do is click on this little camera looking icon for snapshot view, and then you have drop-down menu for all the snapshots. This is our way of processing the drums internally within Kontakt. That way, when you load a snapshot, you're getting a little bit more of a plug-and-play sound kind of mix-ready drum option. Some of these are going to be a lot more processed than others. The default snapshots are definitely going to have the least amount of processing. They're going to be the most CPU friendly for sure. If you're someone that likes to mix in your DAW all of the drums and have more control in your DAW, and you plan on doing a bunch of processing later and don't want to do any of that stuff within the instrument itself, I would definitely recommend using 1 through 4, because again, these are going to be the most natural mix presets available, and they're just going to have the least amount of stuff happening inside, causing any heavy CPU usage. I'm not going to really demonstrate all the mix presets in this video, but we do have another video on our YouTube channel that does go through all 15 mix presets, so make sure to check that out. I have a link in the description as well. A few of my favorite though are definitely UK King of Ping and Rock Metal Core 1. Let's go ahead and check that out. This is an awesome mix preset by Ryan Wood, kind of like our take on a Zach Cervini drum sound. And we have UK King of Ping. These are 2 other presets that Ryan created. These are really aggressive, kind of like knock loose type sounds. Fat and dry rock metal. This is a really cool preset. This is definitely one of the more CPU heavy presets, kind of like our take on a Loathe drum sound. Then we have Snoozy Trinket, which is our take on some of the older Sleep Token releases. Anyways, a whole bunch of other options to choose from. One of my favorite presets in Monarch is Default Rock. This preset is like the closest to the actual sound that I get when I'm tracking from my room for session work and all that kind of stuff. So if I were to go in the other room right now and track drums, it'd be very close to this mix preset. Below that, we have a boost knob. This is going to control how much of the processing is happening on that channel for that specific mix preset. 100%, it's getting all of the processing. 0%, it's not getting any of it. And then right above that, we have a little on-off switch for the boost. So if you just don't want to use any of the processing whatsoever, again, you plan on routing into your DAW and mixing all the drums there, you can come in here and just turn all of this off, and now you are working with no processing whatsoever on Monarch. We have pan for all the shells. We have a spread knob for all of the ambient microphones. And then we have a pan for the hi-hats and ride. We have a tune knob for all the shells, volume fader, mute solo phase buttons. We have a little link feature. This is just so that you can link faders together and move them together as well. And then we have routing at the very bottom. Routing in Monarch is really cool. We have some options here where you can say route all channels to sequential outputs. It's going to go ahead and route everything in ascending order for you. And then now we've also added the ability to route the ambient microphones for the shells and cymbals separately. So if you come over here to overheads, close room, and far room, you'll notice we have 2 different assignments. The left side is going to be for the cymbals, and the right is going to be for the shells. This just gives you more control in your DAW, especially if you want to like experiment a little bit. You know, I personally like to crush the shells in the close room. Sometimes I don't want all that saturation and compression on my cymbals in the close room. So by routing both of them to individual aux buses, I can now control that separately. And then last thing with routing is we have now added advanced routing. So if you open that at the bottom, here we have all of the microphones on Monarch. And this gives you the full ability to route all of these microphones however you want out of contact. Again, if you're someone that just wants the most ultimate amount of control over mixing in your DAW, this is going to give that to you. Also, it's worth mentioning when you do use advanced routing and you route these microphones to outputs in contact, you're going to be taking them off of the internal instrument bus. What that means is that if you are using a mix preset with a ton of processing and then you route the kick-in microphone to output 2, it's no longer going to be going through the instrument kick bus that has all of that processing for the kick drum. So you're going to be working with a completely natural kick-in microphone. All right, and then on the bottom left here, we have a link all button. This is just going to link all the volume faders together so you can move them all at once. Then we have an LR swap. This is just going to change from drummer perspective to audience perspective. And then we have overhead controls. So here we have the ability to pan all of the close microphones for every cymbal on the kit. And then we have tune knobs for all the cymbals. This is actually really cool because, I don't know, you can just experiment and get some really interesting effects, especially if you're going for like a little bit of a deeper tone from the crash cymbals or the China or whatever it is. Obviously, once you go past a certain point with the tune knob in contact for the shells or cymbals, you do start to introduce weird artifacts and starts to sound a little odd, but still pretty cool. So give you a quick example. And then we have envelopes. So here we can just shape the sound even further. We have envelopes for every element. Make sure you click on the envelope that you want to adjust by selecting it in the column on the left or right. And then to turn it on or off, you can just use this toggle switch. And we'll just do a quick adjustment on the snare because that'll probably be the most obvious. And then lastly, we have one shot. So if we come down here, open this page up, we have the ability to load custom one shots for all of the shells on Monarch. And it's very simple to do. All you have to do is come over and drag and drop an audio file into these boxes. So we can just do a snare drum, for example. Let's go ahead and choose this guy, bring it into Monarch. If you click on the image, you can get a little preview of what you have loaded. You can unload by hitting this minus button. We have a pan function, tune, volume, mute, solo, phase, then another link if you just want to control the volume of multiple one-shots together, and a link all down here at the bottom. And then we have routing, so we can actually route all these one-shots to outputs in contact and have even more control in our DAW. Now, really quickly under snare, you'll notice we have rim shot and center. This is going to tell Monarch when to play this one shot for the snare drum. In Monarch, our default mapping has the rim shot and the center hits on separate notes. So if you want the one shot sample to only trigger on the rim shot snare hits, just make sure you have rim shot selected. If you want it on both, then you can have both. If you just want it on center, you can have it on center. All right, moving forward, we have the sub mixer. This is going to have all of the close microphones for each of the shells and cymbals. So your kick in, your kick out 2, kick sub, snare top, snare bottom, your top and bottom microphones for toms, all your close microphones on the cymbals. We have mute, solo, phase buttons, and then another link feature here. And then we have the link all, of course, to link all the faders together. So again, we can just kind of shape the sound of Monarch even further in this page. For the kick and snare, we also have built-in one-shots, the kick sample and the snare sample. If you select the drop-down menu, you can see all of the options. We have a whole bunch of options for snare. And then the buttons below the drop-down menu, this is where you're going to toggle between the variant for whichever one-shot is loaded. So for snare, this is actually going to control the room variant. The first button is going to be a no room or a low room. The middle button is going to be a medium room. Third button is going to be a loud room. So let's take a quick listen. And then for the kick sample, it's actually not going to be a room variant. This time it's going to toggle between just a different pitch variance or the way that kick drum is being processed. And then one more thing to mention with the snare sample, we have a C and an R. This is going to control whether or not you want the snare sample to trigger on snare center hits, on rim shot hits, or both. And then below all of that, we have the reverb section. So on the left side, we have a whole bunch of reverbs that you can choose from. Basic parameters, we have pre-delay, size, tail, mix, little on and off toggle switch for the reverbs. And then we have the reverb sends on the right side for all of the elements on Monarch. One thing to mention with the reverbs is that they do not get routed out if you're using multi-out routing. It's only going to get applied to anything coming out of the default outputs. So my workaround to that is just kind of using the default outputs of Kontakt as a reverb bus. I'll just keep the instrument track that I have Monarch loaded on as the default output. So if I just want an extra bus in my DAW with the reverb from Monarch, I can do that and just have it on the actual instrument track, but everything else will still be routed out and the reverbs will just be coming out on that instrument track. All right, the bleed page. So this is where we can control all of the ambient microphones for every element on Monarch. So you see the top section is going to be for overheads, center section is going to be for close room, then we have a far room section at the bottom. Then we have a solo and a mute button next to it. So I don't know, let's just say, for example, you want to come in here and just kind of dial in your overhead signal. You can solo the overheads, make whatever changes you want, and then continue onwards, solo the close rooms, the far rooms, etc., etc. And then we have a link all if you just want to move all of the knobs together for each section. Processing. So we have built-in processors in Monarch. We have an EQ, we have saturation, we have some compression, we have a Super GT, which is really crazy. It's saturation, compression. You can just kind of get a whole bunch of stuff happening with this processor. And then you have a transient designer, and then tape saturation. So if you want more of like a plug and play situation, you know, maybe you just want to do all of your mixing right within one instance of Kontakt and you don't really care to bus out into your DAW and mix further. Processing page gives you a little bit more flexibility to get a plug and play drum sound all within Monarch. Just like the reverbs, the processing page, this is only going to apply to any signals coming out of the default outputs of Kontakt. So if you're using multi-out routing into your DAW, you're not going to get any of this processing on that signal. It's only going to apply to the default outputs. All right, so the groove page. Monarch does come with its own unique groove pack. It has over 100 grooves and fills and even drum builds. I just wanted Monarch to come with enough content for people to be able to start just immediately creating, you know, a whole bunch of different options for grooves, different fills, again, drum builds. To load a MIDI file, all we have to do is come into one of the folders and double click on the MIDI file here on the right side. You'll notice when I double clicked it, it showed up right here. We have a little play preview button. All right, so let's build something really quickly. If I want to use variation 4, all I have to do is come over here, click and drag into my edit window. And then let's find a groove. We can go with 115. Our BPM is 120. That's close enough. We'll go with that. And we'll just arrange these back to back. Take a listen. One thing to mention about the groove player in Monarch is that I wanted this to be just a little bit more special than your average groove player. So a lot of groove players with Kontakt libraries will only recognize a very basic general MIDI mapping. So you're not really going to be able to program grooves that incorporate other elements like, let's say, a stack or like a lot of the effect cymbals or anything like that. With Monarch, I really wanted to be able to release groove packs in the future that can utilize all of the elements on the kit, because we have, you know, the little mini bell, or the crasher hats, we have the stack, the far left crash. There's just a whole bunch of stuff, and you know, there's a lot of different ways we can write grooves for Monarch. So the groove player in Monarch is actually designed to read more elements than just your standard general MIDI functions. In fact, if we come over here to the settings page and we look at the general MIDI mapping, this gives you an idea of all the elements that are going to be assigned to general MIDI and which elements will work in the groove player. Just another way to kind of expand on the creativity that's capable within Monarch. And moving forward, for all of our future instruments, our groove players are just going to be a lot more dynamic and have that capability so that when we do release new MIDI packs, they're going to really be able to take advantage of all of the elements that each drum library has to offer. Just a tiny little detail that I really felt proud of with the groove player in Monarch. And then we have the settings page. This is where we have all the MIDI assignments for each hit on Monarch. You can see we have 2 assignments per hit, and then we have a little MIDI learn function. So if you're using like an E kit or a synth, you can come in here, select the MIDI learn next to whichever hit you want to assign, hit a key on your synth or hit a pad on your E-kit, and it's going to learn that assignment. And at the bottom here, we have a bunch of MIDI mapping presets for other libraries. You can also export custom mappings. Then if we come over to page 2, we have cymbal mutes now. So this is going to emulate if you hit a cymbal and then you grab it with your hand to mute it. So we can make assignments for all of that over here. And then we have a little trim section here for the built-in one-shots and the custom one-shots. So to give you a quick example of how you might use this, let's say you have a custom one-shot loaded and you have it triggering on both snare center and rim shot. However, whenever it triggers for snare center, it's just too loud because usually one-shot hits are really heavy and just kind of in your face, right? So maybe it's just too loud for snare center. So we can come in here and we can turn down the trim for that custom one shot on snare center. So now if we go to the one shots and you have your snare one shot triggering for both center and rim shot, it's no longer going to be as loud for the center hits. And then we have the same for the built-in one shots as well. All right, so let's talk about the snare modes. So snare mode 1 and 2, we can toggle between them right here. To explain snare modes, the normal mapping for RS libraries is that we put snare center and snare rim shot on 2 separate notes. That is 100% a preference thing. I like to see snare center and rim shot on 2 separate notes because I identify them as 2 different individual types of hits. For me, it visually makes sense to see the MIDI as 2 separate things when I'm programming drums. However, there are definitely people that like programming snare center and rim shot on the same note, and there are libraries out there that actually put both of those hits on one note. So snare mode 1 is going to keep the snare center separate from the rim shot. You're going to have them on 2 separate notes. When you turn on snare mode 2, it's going to take the loudest rim shot hit and it's going to put it at the top of the velocity range for snare center. So this is now going to allow you to program all of your snare center hits and rim shot hits on one MIDI note. And this is also helpful, for example, if you're transferring MIDI from a library that does have center and rim shot on the same note, instead of trying to go through and say, oh, this is a rim shot, I have to move it to the RS mapping, you can just come in here and select snare mode 2 and you're good to go. Now, one thing to mention with the built-in one-shots and the custom one-shots, if you are using snare mode 2, it's really important that you have the centers selected for the snare sample for the built-in one-shots and also for the custom one-shots. Because now you're telling Monarch that all of your snare hits are going to be on the center hit, including the rim shots. So you want to make sure that all of the one-shots know to trigger on snare center hits. And even if you are using snare mode 2, you can still have rim shot assigned to a separate note. What's good about that is that there are 5 velocities for rim shot. So let's say you want to use a softer rim shot hit, you can do that because it'll still be on a separate note. This is also important for E-Kit players because if you have a snare pad with only a single zone, you can use snare mode 2 so that way you have all your snare center hits and then your loudest hit on that same zone is going to be a rim shot. And then moving on, we have Flam Time. I'm so happy that we added this. I like to program my flams manually, so I'll go in there and actually enter in 2 MIDI notes and space them how I want the flam to be. But if you're someone that likes to just use one single MIDI assignment to program a flam, we have now put in a Flam Time slider. So this is going to allow you to control how wide or narrow your flams are. So to give you a quick idea, this is just with it centered. If we want it really close, we want it really far. There you go, Flam Time slider. I love it. All right, velocity curves. Here we have velocity curves for all the elements on Monarch. We have a toggle switch above each box to turn it on or off. You can come in here, click in the graph to adjust. We have global adjustments for everything. A bunch of CC learn functions right here. This is mainly going to be for E-Kit players. And then we have aftertouch. Now, if you are on an E-Kit, I highly recommend you come in here and experiment with some of these velocity curves because Monarch, again, is a very dynamic kit. So to get Monarch communicating with your module a little bit better, just to make things feel more natural on your E-Kit, adjusting some of these velocity curves is definitely going to help. And that's pretty much the Monarch kit. Huge thanks to everyone for all of the support that we received on this release. A lot of time and effort went into creating the Monarch kit, so it really does mean a lot. Huge thanks to Moises, Chris, Austin, and Ryan Wood. Everyone that was involved just putting the Monarch kit together, it really means a lot. You know, as we move forward, each release kind of provides the next framework for what we can look at and say, okay, how do we improve this now for the next release? When we released Fairview, you know, we kind of sat back and said, okay, cool. How can we improve on this and elaborate on certain elements here and there? And on top of that, you know, listening to all the feedback that we got from Fairview, I kind of took all that and poured as much of it back into Monarch. Monarch is kind of like this new framework. We've done a lot with it that we want to continue doing with future libraries. We're already working on several new projects that I'm really excited about, and we've taken a lot of the little things that we've done in Monarch and just improved on them even further. So yeah, I'm really excited to show everyone what else we have in store, and it's all I got for you. Thank you for watching.